as serial killers. Known for eating parts of some of his victims, he was nicknamed the Cannibal Killer and the Milwaukee Cannibal. Dahmer's macabre crimes have inspired multiple books and films. Jeff Dahmer raped, killed and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. His victims were all men, mostly young and gay, and most of them were of color. Many of the victims were not known to be missing by their families. Sadly, quite a few of them were disowned or tossed aside by their own families. Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on May 21, 1960, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. His parents were educated and affluent. His dad was a chemist and his mother had a master's degree in counseling. His family described him as a healthy, happy child however, until about age 4. As a 4-year-old boy, Jeffrey Dahmer underwent a surgery to correct a double hernia. Jeffrey Dahmer became even more withdrawn after his little brother was born. Dahmer had felt that he was being left out by his family and that was not being given enough attention. Jeffrey Dahmer killed for the first time in the summer of 1978, 2 weeks after he graduated from high school. He was 18 years old. His father was away on business and he was home alone. He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks and brought him back to the home to drink. The two drank beer together but eventually the man tried to leave. Jeff didn't like that, so he hit him over the head with a 10-pound dumbbell. Jeffrey strangled Hicks to death with the dumbbell. Dahmer dismembered the corpse and packed his parts into plastic bags which he buried behind his parents' home. Later, Jeff exhumed the human remains and crushed the bones with a sledgehammer before scattering the bits across a ravine. Jeff Dahmer later admitted to the murder, and said he killed him because he didn't want him to leave. It would be 9 years before Dahmer killed again. But, he didn't stay out of trouble. In both 1982 and 1986, he was arrested for indecent exposure. In 1986, 2 boys accused him of masturbating in front of them. Dahmer was also arrested for drugging, fondling and photographing a 13-year-old boy. He was required to register as a sex offender for that incident. Stephen Toomey was Jeff Dahmer's second victim. He killed Toomey in September of 1987 in a hotel, after picking him up from a bar and drugging him. Jeffrey later claimed that he had no memory of that murder and that he had no intention to kill him. Dahmer killed 2 men in 1988 and another man in 1989. He picked up both of the victims at gay bars. During some of his later murders, he had sex with the bodies and preserved many of the victims' body parts. He admitted in an interview that when he killed his victims, it felt like they became a permanent part of Dahmer. One of Dahmer's victims managed to escape death on July 22, 1991. Tracy Edwards, 32, was picked up by Milwaukee police officers after they spotted him on the street, about a block from Dahmer's apartment with a handcuff hanging off one of his wrists. Edwards told the cops that a weird dude drugged, restrained him and threatened him with a knife. He brought the officers to Dahmer's apartment. Reportedly, Jeff calmly offered to get the keys for the handcuffs. But then police went into his bedroom to look for the knife. While seeking out the weapon, the cops found something much more disturbing: Polaroid photographs of dismembered bodies. Subsequently, Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested but not before Jeff attempted to fight the police. Soon the cops found a human head in his refrigerator. Homicide detective Patrick Kennedy recounted the chilling find. The word surreal is used quite a bit. But it really was surreal here. When I looked into the refrigerator, it was a clean and empty refrigerator. The only exception was an open box of Arm & Hammer baking soda in the back. And, one box in the middle, containing a freshly severed, bloodless, human head. It was a black male with his eyes and mouth open. The severed head had an expression of almost excitement or surprise. I can say that I had been a police officer for many years and seen some horrendous things. However, I can tell you that the sight was so weird that everything in my whole being told me, man, you need to get the hell out of here. The police officer called it the most disturbing sight he had ever seen. The police discovered 11 other skulls and heads in the freezers and in Jeff's closet. The decapitated head in the fridge was one Jeffrey wanted to keep fresh because he said this was the most beautiful man that Dahmer had ever seen. Jeffy wanted to keep the severed head fresh, so he would take it out, make love to it, fondle him, and touch him. He added that Jeffrey Dahmer would kill and have oral sex with all the frozen heads. Also discovered in Dahmer's home: jars full of human genitalia and even more Polaroid photos of Jeff's victims. In February 1992, Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences in prison. His time in prison was mostly spent trolling his peers. Jeffrey's former prison minister Roy Ratcliffe said Dahmer enjoyed making light of his cannibalism. If he saw a guard that was nervous and standing near enough to hear him, he would say, "I bite." Usually the guard would jump away, and that would make Jeff laugh. On November 28, 1994, just 2 years after his sentencing, Dahmer was beaten to death by his fellow inmate Christopher Scarver at the Columbia Correctional Institution. Scarver said he killed Dahmer because of his creepy sense of humor. The serial killer turned prison food into fake limbs, which he covered in blood, aka ketchup. Dahmer left those fake limbs around the prison to mess with fellow inmates and staff. He crossed the line with some people, prisoners, prison staff. Scarver stated some people who are in prison are repentant, but he was not one of them.
Myself to it. I don't know, I went to great lengths.
He is pure evil, but you'd never know it by looking at him. But when you hear him, that's another story. His killing field was Milwaukee, and he got away with murder for more than a decade. But how could any of this happen? For the first time ever, Nancy Glass is here, inside the world of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Bill, when I sat down opposite Jeffrey Dahmer for this interview, I wondered what he would tell me, how hard it would be to get him to discuss his horrific crimes. What I found was that he was very forthcoming. He volunteered details that may be difficult to hear. I began by asking what he wanted from the men he picked up.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to, I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them?
Right, right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons.
Jeffrey Dahmer is recalling his monstrous past. Almost 2 years ago, in this little apartment in Milwaukee, police discovered the grisly remnants of one of the most horrible crime sprees in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer, an unassuming chocolate factory worker, would eventually confess that he had seduced, murdered, and dismembered 17 young men. He even ate some of his victims' body parts. He instantly became the center of worldwide media attention, a serial killer unmasked. There were protests and press conferences in Milwaukee as people tried to understand how this could have happened in their midst. How did Jeffrey Dahmer get away with murder after murder for 13 years? How did a boy born into a hard-working, middle-class family turn into the worst kind of monster imaginable? In this exclusive interview, we put those questions to Jeffrey Dahmer himself. We met with him at the maximum security prison where he is serving his sentence of 999 years. For the first time, he talks about his crimes and gives us a chilling look inside the mind of a serial killer.
It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier to do things you shouldn't do.
The reason why Jeffrey Dahmer was able to get away with his crimes was because of just what you are seeing here. Jeffrey Dahmer is intelligent and articulate. That is what makes him so frightening. But if you listen carefully to his words throughout this interview, you realize it is a thin disguise. You do sound, though, like the kind of person who could have said to himself, "This is wrong. I must stop."
I always knew that it was wrong, but after the first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall back in '78. I had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance over him.
The hitchhiker's name was Stephen Hicks. He was just 18. Jeffrey Dahmer took him to his parents' house. There he strangled him with a barbell. He dismembered the body and hid it in a drain pipe. It was Jeffrey Dahmer who gave those details to the police in his confession.
No one had a clue as to what was happening for over a decade.
During that time, Jeffrey Dahmer joined the Army and was sent to Germany. He was eventually discharged for a drinking problem and returned to Ohio. 9 years after Stephen Hicks' murder, the killing began again. What happened to you in the 9 years in between that you were able to stop, that you were able to control yourself?
It just wasn't an opportunity to fully express what I wanted to do. There was just not the physical opportunity to do it then. And I started, when I moved to Milwaukee in '81, I started reading pornography, going to the bookstores. Eventually that led to frequenting the gay bars. And then one time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. I had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here. I was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory?
I have no memory of it. But that's what started the whole spree all over again.
Dahmer says he snuck the corpse of his victim, Stephen Toomey, out of his hotel room in a suitcase. Then he took it to his grandmother's house, where he cut up the body and put it in plastic garbage bags. When you killed these men, afterwards, were you repulsed? Were you upset?
No, at the time, it was almost addictive. It was almost a surge of energy. I wouldn't have to worry about any of their needs or anything. I just had complete control of the situation.
But Jeffrey Dahmer was out of control. The urge to kill had overpowered him. As police later learned, he wasn't satisfied with his victim's death. He wanted more. Why did you photograph them?
It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. I also wanted to keep something. If I couldn't keep them there with me whole, at least I felt that I could keep their skeletons. And I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with the 10 different skulls and skeletons.
And what was the purpose of the altar going to be?
As a sort of memorial. A point where I could, I don't know, it's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe. A place where I could collect my thoughts and feed my obsession.
When the bodies were still in your apartment, there was no time when you would see them and say, this is grotesque, what have I done?
There were times, but the compulsive obsession with doing what I was doing overpowered any feelings of revulsion.
This man with a quiet, almost shy demeanor became a master manipulator who was able to lure strangers he met at gay bars to his apartment. He was even able to con the police into returning a 14-year-old boy to him after neighbors called 911 upset that the child was in the street naked and bleeding. Dahmer convinced the police that he and the boy were simply having a lover's quarrel.
It's an intoxicated
boyfriend of another boyfriend.
Well, how old was this child?
It wasn't a child, it was an adult.
After the police left, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered that boy, Conorak Synthesomphone. This man says he had a near-fatal encounter with Jeffrey Dahmer.
He wanted to take some picture of my back. He hit me with a rubber hammer on my neck.
He was lucky to escape because by then the killing had become almost routine. Before you went out to pick up a man, was there any kind of ritual you went through?
I'd go to the nightclubs, drink, watch the striptease shows, and if I didn't meet anyone at the bars, I'd go to the bath clubs and meet someone there, offer them money, and we'd go back to the apartment, have a few drinks. I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep, and that's when they would be strangled.
Watching the movie Exorcist 3 was also part of his ritual. It put him in the mood for murder.
I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape.
Did you like feeling evil?
No, I didn't. But I tried to overcome the thoughts, and it worked for a while, but eventually I gave in.
While Jeffrey Dahmer may say things today that make it seem like he understands what went on in his mind, he does not. All he can do is tell you what happened, but he cannot stop whatever it is that drove him to kill in the first place. Do you still feel those same urges? Do you still feel that compulsion, that obsession?
I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do have the old compulsions.
Jeffrey Dahmer says as time went on, his mind became more and more warped, and yet he was clever enough to continue to elude police and lure young men to his apartment. We should warn you, the details are very graphic.
I started having these obsessive thoughts when I was about 15 and 16, and they got worse and worse.
What were your fantasies about?
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Was there pleasure in that fantasy?
There was excitement, fear, pleasure, all mixed together.
Jeffrey Dahmer fulfilled his fantasies by murdering and dismembering 17 young men. In time, his desires became more extreme, his deeds more grotesque. Listen to him talk about the most unnatural things in the most matter-of-fact of ways. That's when you realize that none of it has touched him.
I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me. At first it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive. Then I tried to keep the person alive by inducing a zombie-like state. By injecting first dilute acid solution into their brain or hot water, and it never did completely work.
Could someone like you be stopped? Could you be helped?
No, I was dead set on going with this compulsion. It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
He became so warped by his evil impulses that he even took a victim's head with him to work at the Ambrosia chocolate factory.
I kept the mummified head and skull of one of the victims in a carrying case in my locker at work.
Were you almost flaunting it?
Yes, but that's how strong the compulsion was. That's how bizarre the desire was. I wanted to keep something of the person with me.
Jeffrey Dahmer exhibited some disturbing behavior early on. He began drinking heavily as a teenager, dropped out of college, was arrested for indecent exposure, disorderly conduct, and fondling a 13-year-old boy. Tragically, one of his murder victims would be that boy's brother.
Do you know what started it? Was there any kind of incident that you can remember?
To this day, I don't know what started it. And the person to blame is sitting right across from you. That's the only person. Not parents, not society, not pornography. I mean, those are just excuses.
His macabre 13-year crime spree finally ended when this man, Tracy Edwards, brought the police to the infamous apartment. Like the others, he had gone there with the promise of money.
He was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point. I hit him, and I ran.
What was the turning point for you that made you suddenly realize that you had done something terribly wrong, something you should be sorry for?
It was the night of the arrest. I have no memory of what happened during the 6 hours before the last victim ran out of the apartment. I heard a knock on the door, and the police were there with the last victim. They asked me where the key was to the handcuffs. My mind was in a haze. I sort of pointed to the bedroom, and that's where they found the pictures. And they yelled, "Cuff him." And I was handcuffed, and it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore. The best route was to help the police identify all the victims and just make a complete confession.
When it was revealed that most of the victims were black or homosexual, people in Milwaukee were incensed. Many felt that was why he went after them and why the police didn't seem to care when their families reported them missing.
10 of your 17 victims were black. Were they racially motivated?
It was
crimes?
not racially motivated. It was not sexual preference. It was just to find an obsession with the best-looking young man I could find.
While you just heard him say that his sexual preference had nothing to do with the killings, he has not come to terms with his homosexuality.
Never understood it. There was no use trying to fight it because I couldn't rid myself of it. It was too powerful and persistent.
Do you dislike it?
Yes, it's caused a lot of problems for me. A lot of conflicts and unanswered questions.
The conflicts remain with him, and so do his compulsions. But in prison, he finally cannot act on his savage desires.
If you were out on the street now, would you still be committing the crimes?
Probably. If this hadn't happened, there's no doubt I probably would be. I can't think of anything that would have stopped me.
A lot of strength. Thank you all. God bless America.
My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan. I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker. I hate you. This is out of control. Don't fuck with me, Jeffrey. I'll kill you. God damn it. Look at me, motherfucker. I kill you.
What's your name, sir?
The
court will impose a mandatory life sentence.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to, I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them?
Right, right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier to do things you shouldn't do. I always knew that it was wrong, but after the first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall back in '78. I had had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance over him. No one had a clue as to what was happening for over a decade. It just wasn't an opportunity to fully express what I wanted to do. There was just not the physical opportunity to do it then. And I started, when I moved to Milwaukee in '81, I started reading pornography, going to the bookstores. Eventually that led to frequenting the gay bars. And then one time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. I had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here, was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory?
I have no memory of it. But that's what started the whole spree all over again.
When you killed these men, afterwards, were you upset?
No, at the time, it was almost addictive. It was almost a surge of energy. I wouldn't have to worry about any of their needs or anything. I just had complete control of the situation.
Why did you photograph them?
It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. I also wanted to keep something. If I couldn't keep them there with me whole, at least I felt that I could keep their skeletons. And I even went so far as planning on setting up an altar with the 10 different skulls and skeletons.
And what was the purpose of the altar going to be?
As a sort of memorial. A point where I could, I don't know. It's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe. A place where I could collect my thoughts and feed my obsession.
When the bodies were still in your apartment, there was no time when you would see them and say, this is grotesque, what have I done?
There were times, but the compulsive obsession with doing what I was doing overpowered any feelings of revulsion. I'd go to the nightclubs, drink, watch the striptease shows, and if I didn't meet anyone at the bars, I'd go to the bath clubs and meet someone there, offer them money, and we'd go back to the apartment, have a few drinks. I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep, and that's when they would be strangled. I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape.
Did you like feeling evil?
No, I didn't, but I had tried to overcome the thoughts, and it worked for a while, but eventually I gave in.
Do you still feel that compulsion, that obsession?
I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do still do have the old compulsions. I started having these obsessive thoughts when I was about 15 and 16, and they got worse and worse. They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality. There was excitement, fear, pleasure, all mixed together. I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me. At first it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive. Then I tried to keep the person alive by inducing a zombie-like state. By injecting first dilute acid solution into their brain or hot water, and it never did completely work.
Could someone like you be stopped? Could you be helped?
No, I was dead set on going with this compulsion. It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction. I kept the mummified head and skull of one of the victims in a carrying case in my locker at work.
Were you almost flaunting it?
Yes, but that's how strong the compulsion was. That's how bizarre the desire was. I wanted to keep something of the person with me. To this day, I don't know what started it. And the person to blame is sitting right across from you. That's the only person. Not parents, not society, not pornography. I mean, those are just excuses.
What was the turning point for you?
It was the night of the arrest. I have no memory of what happened during the 6 hours before the last victim ran out of the apartment. I heard a knock on the door, and the police were there with the last victim. They asked me where the key was to the handcuffs. My mind was in a haze. I sort of pointed to the bedroom, and that's where they found the pictures. And they yelled, "Cuff him." I was handcuffed, and it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore. The best route was to help the police identify all the victims and just make a complete confession.
Were they racially motivated?
It was not racially motivated. It was not sexual preference. It was just to find an obsession with the best-looking young man I could find. Never understood it. There was no use trying to fight it because I couldn't rid myself of it. It was too powerful and persistent.
Do you dislike it?
Yes, it's caused a lot of problems for me. A lot of conflicts and unanswered questions.
If you were out on the street now, would you still be committing the crimes?
Probably. If this hadn't happened, there's no doubt I probably would be. I can't think of anything that would have stopped me. Well, there's no question that I deserve the death penalty. I've wondered myself why I don't have the death penalty. That's what I deserve. I deserve death.
What do you think happens after you die?
Right. That's the big unknown. I've had thoughts of suicide, but I just haven't been able to carry them through. So I don't know what the future will hold.
Why was it so easy, though, for you to hide it all?
I desensitized myself to it. I don't know. I went to great lengths. I bought security systems, installed them myself in the apartment. I had a video camera in the corner of the room, installed locks on the doors, sirens and stuff in case anyone broke into the apartment. Everything was locked up, either in the freezer or in the file chest. And so there was no evidence laying in the open. There was nothing abnormal about the look of the apartment.
During the incident where the police were called, and the young boy was returned to you, that didn't wake you up at all? The police on your doorstep?
They were in the apartment. They were actually in the apartment, and there was a dead young man in the bedroom on the floor. I couldn't believe it when it turned out that they didn't see anything. I couldn't believe it. And yes, it did shock me, but not enough to quit. That's how strong the compulsion was.
Do you ever think about your victims?
I've often wondered why I haven't had more dreams or nightmares about what I've done. For some reason, it's like it's blocked off from part of my mind. If I dwelled on the subject all the time, I wouldn't be able to function.
You're wearing glasses now.
Right.
You didn't during the trial.
I didn't want to. I felt uncomfortable looking anyone in the face. I didn't want to see anyone's face clearly. It helped me disassociate myself from what was happening.
One woman in particular really got angry. What did you think when she was doing that?
I couldn't blame her a bit. I'm surprised there wasn't more of that.
What do you want to say to the families of the victims?
I had no intention of hurting them. I was extremely selfish. I was only thinking of myself, my own pleasure, my own perverted desires.
You know the families of the victims don't believe in your conversion or your sorrow.
Oh, right. And if I was on their end of the table, I wouldn't either. Ultimately, I'm accountable to the Lord Jesus Christ. He'll be my final judge.
Can your sins be forgiven?
The Lord Jesus Christ's shed blood is powerful enough to wipe out even my sins. I usually wake up at 6:30 in the morning, go eat breakfast, and then sleep until noon, wake up for lunch, and sleep until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, eat dinner, and then spend the greater portion of the night watching TV. I try not to think too deeply about anything, because then I get depressed. I try to figure out why this happened, what started these thoughts in my head at such a young age, whether this has any meaning to it, or whether this is all just a horrible coincidence, you know, all the events in my life. I feel that I'm better off here than I was on the outside doing what I was doing.
You're glad you're in prison.
I think it's best for everyone, right? I had normal friendships in high school, but after that, I started in with the alcohol, drinking, a lot of solitary drinking, and really never had any close friendships after that, after high school. Just sort of lived in my own thought life, fantasy world.
Were you molested?
Never, never.
In your childhood, you have any memories of anything that you would associate with what you became?
No, that's the strange thing. I can't pinpoint anything.
So there was nothing in your childhood?
No, no abuse, no physical abuse, no verbal abuse. It was a normal childhood in a good home. Something went awry in my thought life. I don't know why.
Were you obsessed with dead animals? Is that true?
I was interested in taxidermy in high school and experimented with preserving the bones of dogs and things like that. And whether that had anything to do with the escalation of the crimes, I don't know.
Jeffrey Dahmer brutally murdered 17 young men and boys.
Once it happened the first time, it just seemed like it had control of my life from there on in.
His killing spree lasted more than a decade, and the horror didn't stop at murder. Was there something sexual in the dismemberment of the bodies for you?
Yes, it was a sexual part to that.
Why the cannibalism? How could a seemingly normal Midwestern boy grow up to commit such terrible crimes? Dahmer's parents struggled to find the answers.
It's been eternal torment.
Dahmer agreed to speak with us at the behest of his father, who had just written a revealing book. Is there anything in this book that you strongly disagree with?
Yes.
On the surface, the interview with Lionel Dahmer was matter of fact. Well, you were holding back your emotions.
Yeah.
But beneath his composure, unbearable pain.
But they don't realize that I have very deep feelings inside.
I interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer and his parents at length in 1994. Much of what they shared has never been heard until now. MSNBC brings you the never-before-seen confessions of a serial killer. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stone Phillips. In February 1994, at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, I sat down with serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer for his first, and as it turned out, his last network television interview. His father, Lionel Dahmer, had just written a book about his son, and he joined us. Jeff, as his father called him, was polite and seemed unnervingly normal. Rarely had a serial killer spoken in such detail about his crimes or the possible root causes. But this father and son spoke about both, as did Dahmer's mother in a rare interview. As you'll see, even looking back more than a decade later, there are still no easy answers.
How are you, Dad? Hi, Jeff. Sherry, how are you? Yeah. Good to see you. It's good to see you.
Hi, Jeff. Mr. Phillips.
Hi, Mr. Phillips. How are you?
Nice to see you. You've been spending the last few days with your folks.
Great.
Talking about a lot of different things.
Hey, you're lucky it came up on a day when there's no snow. It was snowing like crazy all weekend.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How are things going here for you?
Slow and steady. Nothing out of the ordinary, really.
You've read the book?
Yes. Yes, I read the book. My dad sent it to me about last week, and spent all night reading it. I was up all night reading it. It was quite a surprise to me, some parts of it. Very interesting.
In what sense?
Just some of the things that were revealed caught me off guard, and just some very big surprises in it for me.
What was it that caught you off guard?
Some of his insights into what he thought of me as I was growing up.
All set? Everybody ready? Okay, let's all take a deep breath. Your dad comes here to visit about once a month, but I get the impression that the two of you don't talk a lot about everything that happened, about the crimes in particular.
No, we don't discuss that because it's been gone over so thoroughly in the papers and the media that there's just really no point in going into any in-depth talks about it. We talk about our family, home, how things used to be, what prison life is like here now, and try to keep things as light and upbeat as possible.
Is it hard for you to go back and talk about those things?
No, not the good things. In fact, it gives me a sense of comfort to talk about the few good times there were in the past.
You say the few good times. Do you think of your childhood as having been profoundly unhappy?
No, not profoundly. My childhood wasn't filled with any great tragedies or anything. There were good times and there were bad times. I think it was fairly normal.
Jeff, do you remember your earliest experience and earliest interest, fascination with the inside of animals? Where that came from?
In 9th grade, in biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs. I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it. And I just started branching out, dogs, cats. I suppose it could have turned into a normal hobby like taxidermy, but it didn't. It veered off into this. Why, I don't know. All I know is that I wanted to see what the insides of these animals looked like.
Was there some pleasure in the cutting open of the animal?
Yes, there was. No sexual pleasure, but just it's hard to describe.
Sense of power, sense of control?
I suppose that's a good way of putting it, yeah.
I can sort of see a fascination for, wanting to see or for looking at the insides of animals, say for the first time. After you did it one time, what more is to be gained by looking at another dog's inside, the second or the third?
I don't know. It became a compulsion, and it switched from animals to humans. I still don't understand it. I don't know why.
What would you do with the dead animals, Jeff? You would pick the carcasses up from the road and take them back into the woods.
Take them back in the woods, skin them sometimes, slit them all the way open, look at the organs, feel them. There was a sort of general excitement for me. I don't know why. It was exciting to see.
One of your dad's biggest questions is when you began to slip away, when you crossed over into this world of obsession or dark fantasy from which you just couldn't return. Can you pinpoint that? Is there a sense for when that really began to happen with you, Jeff?
I think it was around age 14 or 15. Started having obsessive thoughts of violence intermingled with sex. And it just got worse and worse. I didn't know how to tell anyone about it, so I didn't. I just kept it all inside.
Do you have any sense for where that was coming from?
No. No, I've talked with a few psychologists about it. They have their theories, but they don't have any concrete answers either.
Do you have a theory?
No, not really. I don't know where it came from. I probably will never know. But I never dreamed that it would become a reality.
Coming up, more pointed questions for a serial killer. Why the cannibalism? Jeffrey Dahmer was finally caught in 1991 after one of his would-be victims escaped and alerted police. What was discovered in Dahmer's apartment was horrifying. Body parts in a barrel, a human head in a refrigerator. When he confessed, the gruesome details were almost impossible to comprehend. What was it, Jeff, that took you over the edge, do you think, and made you take this from the world of fantasy into reality?
From 15 on, I had this reoccurring fantasy of meeting a hitchhiker on the road and of taking him hostage and doing what I wanted with him. About 3 years later, I was 18 years old, driving home. I saw this hitchhiker about a mile from my house. Thought to myself, should I stop and pick him up, or should I just keep on going? I wish I just kept on going, but I didn't. Turned around, picked him up, and that's when the nightmare became a reality. It just seemed so bizarre to me this obsession that I had been thinking about and wanting, just all the parts are there, and they make it possible to make it happen.
What happened after you took him to the house?
The house was empty. My mother was up in Chippewa Falls with her family, and my dad was living in a rented motel about 5 miles away due to the divorce. And I pretty much had the place to myself. I was drinking a lot during that time, and just, I don't know, looking for something to, some way to find some fulfillment, some pleasure. And I acted on my fantasies, and that's where everything went wrong.
This was the summer of 1978 when you took your first victim.
Right. Once it happened the first time, it just seemed like it had control of my life from there on in. The second occurrence was 1984, roughly. And I met this guy at one of the bars, downtown Milwaukee bars. We went back to the hotel, just planning on getting drunk. I had put some sleeping pills in his drink to render him unconscious. And was just going to spend the night with him. When I woke up in the morning, my forearms were bruised, and his chest was bruised, and blood was coming out of his mouth. He was hanging over the side of the bed, and I have no memory of beating him to death, but I must have. And that's when it all started again.
And once it started again, you found it impossible to stop.
Right, that's when the obsession went into full swing.
Did you ever tell yourself, I have to stop this? I must stop doing this?
Yes.
When it was going on?
After the second time, it seemed like the compulsion to do it was too strong, and I didn't even try to stop it after that. But before the second time, things had been building up gradually, going to bookstores, going to the bars, the gay bars, bath clubs. When that wasn't enough, buying sleeping pills and using it on various guys in the bath clubs. It just escalated slowly but surely. And after the second time, which was not planned, it was out of control. It felt like it was out of control.
Where did sex enter in to the killings, Jeff?
It was a big part of it. My only objective was to find the best-looking guy that I could. Their sexual preference didn't matter to me.
Did their race matter to you?
No, their race didn't matter to me. The first two young men were white. The third young man was American Indian. The fourth and fifth were Hispanic. So no, race had nothing to do with it. It was just their looks.
Was there something sexual in the dismemberment of the bodies for you?
As time went on, yes, I did get there was a sexual part to that. I started saving the skeletons and preserving other parts, and one thing led to another. It took more and more deviant type behaviors to satisfy my urges, and so it just spiraled out of control.
Why the cannibalism?
It made me feel like they were a permanent part of me. Besides the just mere curiosity of what it would be like, it made them feel that they were a part of me, and it gave me a sexual satisfaction to do that.
Was it the killing that excited you, or is it what happened after the killing?
No, the killing was just a means to an end. That was the least satisfactory part. I didn't enjoy doing that. That's why I tried to create living zombies uric acid in the drill, but it never worked. No, the killing wasn't the objective. I just wanted to have the person under my complete control, not having to consider their wishes, being able to keep them there as long as I wanted. It's not easy to say that, but that's what the motive was.
Where did that need for control come from? Do you have any idea?
I don't know, maybe I felt I had no control as a child or young adult, and that got mixed in with my sexuality, and I ended up doing what I did was my way of feeling in complete control, at least for that situation, creating my own little world where I had the final say, finding the best looking guy that I could, and having total mastery over him for as long as I wanted. Lust played a big part of it, controlling lust. That was the motive right there.
A lot of this came out in the course of the trial. Obviously, both of you sat through this. Have the two of you sat down and talked about these things before?
No, not in depth.
This is the first time you're talking about these things with
I've talked
your
about
dad
it
here.
At great length with psychiatrists, court-appointed psychiatrists, psychologists, but not with my family.
We learned everything at the trial and in the confessions and that sort of thing after the fact.
The two of you never really communicated all that much, did you, father and son?
Not on any deep level, no. We talked about superficial things. Never really had a real deep heart-to-heart talk about what was going on inside our own minds. I was always a very private person. I didn't like to open up and share anything with anyone. I like to keep my thoughts to myself.
Why do you think that was?
Because from about 15 years on up, a great deal of my thoughts were basically unshareable with anyone. So I just closed myself off and put on a mask of normalcy.
Coming up, were you surprised to read that about your dad?
Very surprised. I suppose everyone has their secret thoughts.
When I interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer in 1994, his father Lionel had just written a book as part of his own painful journey to try and understand how his son became a serial killer. Despite regular visits to the prison, father and son had never spoken about many of the topics covered in the book until our interview. You've read the book.
Right.
He called it a father's story. Pretty simple title.
Right.
Not a simple story, though.
No, not a simple story. Not one that was easy for me to read. But I'm glad he wrote it.
Did it hurt? Was it painful to read?
Yes, it was painful. Some parts of it were, for me, were even fun to read. There were good parts. It wasn't all negative.
Was it emotional for you reading the book?
Yes, it was.
Tell me, what kind of feelings did you have reading it?
Deep regret, sorrow. I guess those were the two main emotions.
Is there anything in this book that you strongly disagree with?
Yes, I disagree with the description of me as being so incredibly shy and introverted, because maybe that's the way my dad saw me, because there was so much tension in the home that I really didn't feel like being up and happy a lot of the times. But with my friends in school, I had a good time. We had good social life, and so I wasn't so extremely reclusive and self-centered as it portrays me.
Does it surprise you to hear Jeff say that he doesn't think of himself and never did as innately shy?
It did surprise me. Maybe my perception was accentuated to the extreme.
But you do recall at age 6 that you became more aware of tensions in the home.
Oh yeah, that's the time I really remember noticing that things weren't quite right.
So it wasn't so much innate shyness as it was wanting to withdraw from tension and arguments and problems in the house.
That's how I saw it, yeah. I sort of lived in my own little fantasy world when things got too heated in the household. And I carried that over for years, I guess.
And was there violence in that fantasy world?
No, not
early on.
Not that, not the type that showed itself later. No, it was just my own little world where I had control.
Was anger a part of it for you, Jeff?
I had some anger. Probably every kid has some anger, you know, about their childhood. It really wasn't a terrible childhood, though. You know, there were a lot of good times. It wasn't a really terrible time.
So pat theories about you as a serial killer striking out to get back at your dad, for instance, don't ring true to you.
No, that has no truth in it. The only motive that there ever was to completely control a person that I found physically attractive, and keep them with me as long as possible, even if it meant just keeping a part of them.
Did you know before you read this book that your dad had his own obsessions and fantasies, that he had thought about, that he had dreamed of committing murder, that he had had an obsession with fire and with explosives?
No, I don't think that's the type of thing one asks one's dad.
Were you surprised to read that about your dad?
Very surprised. Yeah. I didn't know what to think about it. I suppose everyone has their secret thoughts, and so it was somewhat of a shock.
You feel grateful that your father wrote this book? Or do you feel put off by it? I mean, I'm just curious about your overall reaction to it. Do you feel is the book an invasion, do you think? Or is it...
No, I feel nothing but pride for him for writing the book, and having the courage to bare his soul when he didn't have to. He didn't have to get involved with trying to, you know, help me out and support me and be an emotional support for me, and I'll be grateful to him forever for it.
Coming up, a serial killer's take on the meaning of life.
I always believe the lie that evolution is truth. The whole theory cheapens life.
Jeffrey Dahmer kept many secrets, even before he killed his first victim. While it's not unusual for teenagers to keep some things from their parents, Dahmer's father was tormented by the idea that perhaps he had missed a key sign of what was to come and the chance to stop him. But Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't sure he would have revealed anything, and was angered by the way some people had blamed his parents. Did you ever consider talking to your parents, to your dad, about homosexuality? Is that something that you felt you could ever raise?
Early on, I really didn't know that much about it myself. All I knew was that it was something that was to be kept hush-hush, not talked about, not even thought about. So I just kept it all within me and never talked about sexual issues at all, really, with anybody.
Do you think if you had been able to talk about that in a more open way with your dad, for instance, that it would have helped, might have broken this veil of secrecy and enabled you to keep yourself from going down that road?
I don't know exactly what, if anything, would have ever kept me from going down that road. talking about it, I don't think would have made that much difference. Because, like I said, there were things going on in my head that I would have never opened up and talked about with anybody.
Your dad says he never realized how deeply troubled you were because he just thought you were shy the way he had been, shy as a boy. Do you think the signs were there and he just missed them?
No, I don't think so. Because I had thoughts, I had fantasies, but there was no outward show of anything that was wrong.
You were pretty good at keeping it all inside.
Right, I kept it inside, didn't share any of my thoughts or emotions with anybody.
So how would I ever know?
No, you never saw any of it, as far as I know.
I did not really hear from anyone about any of these activities. And that's what really strikes me now, is if I would have known, what would I have done about it? I think I would have done a lot about it.
I feel it's wrong for people who commit crimes to try to shift the blame onto somebody else, onto their parents or onto their upbringing or living circumstances. I think that's just a cop-out. And my parents, my relatives, had no knowledge of what I was doing. They're absolutely not responsible for any of it in any way. And I take full responsibility.
But you understand that what you did would lead your father to ask himself all kinds of questions.
That's true.
Where did I go wrong? Was there something I could have said or done to have prevented this?
Right.
Did I, in some way, create or contribute to the terrible acts my son committed?
I understand that. I just get angry with other people who think that they have a right to somehow try to blame my parents for what happened. That's not right at all. No one has the right to do that because they're totally innocent. They had no knowledge of it. And that angers me.
But parents just naturally, I mean, any parent that really cares, they just first of all say, gee, I feel guilty. You know, there's just feelings of guilt. What happened? What did I do? What could I have done? And so that's a normal parental reaction.
Your dad has wondered about all kinds of things, from the medication that your mom was on during her pregnancy, to the fact that you were exposed to violent arguments in the home from an early age and continuing, to the possibility that he might have passed on some genetic propensity for obsession or violent behavior. Does any of that ring true to you?
I can see why he'd wonder about those things, but as far as I'm concerned, they're all excuses. Because I didn't feel accountable to anybody. I didn't feel that I had to face what I had done ever. And so there comes a point where a person has to be accountable for what he's done. Can't go around making excuses, blaming other people or other things. So I alone am the one who's responsible for what's happened.
Let me ask, when did you first feel that everyone is accountable for their actions?
Well, thanks to you for sending that creation science material, because I always believed the lie that evolution is truth, the theory of evolution is truth, that we all just came from the slime, and when we died, you know, that was it. There was nothing. So the whole theory cheapens life, and started reading books about that show how evolution is just a complete lie. There's no basis in science to uphold it, and I've since come to believe that the Lord Jesus Christ is the true creator of the heavens and the earth. It just didn't just happen, and I have accepted Him as my Lord and Savior. And I believe that I, as well as everyone else, will be accountable to Him.
Growing up, did you feel that you were accountable to your dad or to your mom as the authority figure in the house?
Yes, I did. I mean, they didn't let me run wild. They disciplined me, and so I felt accountable to them. But afterwards, after I left the home, that's when I started wanting to sort of create my own little world where I could be the one who had the complete control, where I didn't have to bow to anyone else's demands, and I just took it way too far.
Lionel? At that period of time, I had drifted away from a belief in a supreme being, and I never, as a result, passed along the feeling that we are all accountable in the end. He owns us. And that basic concept is very fundamental to all of us.
You feel that the absence, at least for a while, of a strong religious faith and belief
for some years
may have prevented you from instilling some of that in Jeff.
That's right.
Is that how you feel?
Yes, I think I had a big part to do with it. I mean, if a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. And I've since come to believe that the Lord Jesus Christ is truly God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They're the only true God.
How would you describe Jeff as a young child? Was he happy? Was he outgoing as a 2, 3, 4-year-old?
He was quite outgoing up until maybe age 3, 3.5, 4, somewhere in there. He developed a double hernia.
That was pretty traumatic for him physically, wasn't it?
I think, you know, if this whole thing is conjecture at this point. It might have been, along with other incidents in his lives, might have been one of the trigger points. I mean, you know, the old Freudian castration complex might come to bear here, and I guess psychoanalysts would really have a heyday with this, because, you know, he was concerned about losing his penis. He asked his mother if he had lost it, if it had been cut off. Now,
which is something he later did to his, or at least some of his victims.
That's true, yes.
One thing that many serial killers have in common is a history of sexual abuse. Was Jeff sexually abused at any time?
No, never.
Was not abused by anyone in the home?
No.
Sexually?
No.
Can you even begin to describe what it's been like for you as the parent of someone who has committed crimes of this nature?
Well, it's been eternal torment. In the privacy of my own room, see, people generally look at me as sort of not emotional, and I come off as maybe a little bit remote because of that.
Well, you were holding back your emotions just now.
But they don't realize that I have very deep feelings inside.
An armchair psychologist would argue that the fact that you are so unemotional about all of this only signifies the fact that inside there may be very powerful emotions.
That's right.
That the person who keeps things so tightly under control is the person who is really afraid of losing control of some very powerful feelings inside. True in your case?
That's probably true, yeah. I would say that's a fair statement.
Today, when you think about the obsessions that were consuming Jeff as a teenager, they aren't altogether unfamiliar, are they?
I think inferiority goes, you know, lack of control or feeling of no control over your environment or kids around you. I think inferiority sort of goes along with shyness. Jeff was shy, I was shy. Then comes the thought of control. You just don't have the control of your environment. And my early infatuation or obsession was with fire. Just about burned down my neighbor's garage one time. Just starting a little fire.
When you were a teenager, you had dreams of committing murder yourself.
Yeah, let me clarify that.
Please.
I was shy and, you know, felt lack of control and so forth, and I was bullied. Okay, there were a lot of bullies in our neighborhood. And almost always after I was either physically or in some other way harassed by bullies, I would wake up, say, the next morning or the morning after that, shortly after that, and I would for just say about 30 seconds or so, have this feeling that I had hurt someone, that I had maybe hurt them badly, that I had killed them. But it was a vague sort of a feeling, and it happened just every so often, and after attacks by neighborhood kids.
The question is, why does a father murder in his dreams and a son murder in real life?
Real life.
Yeah. In mentioning these things and writing about them in your book, you seem to believe that you may have passed on some kind of genetic propensity for obsession or destructive behavior. That might be one factor in this puzzle of why your son did what he did.
It's something to be considered, you know, in the broad spectrum of possibilities. The problem with just calling it genetic predisposition or genetic predestinarianism is that it's not really scientific. It's not true with respect to personality. But it's being investigated.
What led him to cross the line, to go over the edge?
I don't know, but I guess I would just conjecture that whatever it was, it probably goes back further to whatever got hooked into his sexuality. I do believe strongly that I mean, those hormones are the most powerful thing on earth almost, and I do believe that theory.
A sexual drive.
It
was the sexual drive that led him to murder and dismember.
That's my personal belief, and however it got bizarrely hooked into entrails is beyond me, but I believe that if it could be unearthed as to how that happened or what that derivation was, then we'd have the answer.
It was his first and last network television interview. Serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer talking about his horrific crimes and trying to figure out for himself why he had such a compulsion to kill. Much had been made of the home environment in which he grew up and the marital strife to which he was exposed throughout his childhood. Could he have been so affected it would later drive him to commit unspeakable crimes? Dahmer had strong feelings about that.
What do you remember about your parents arguing when you were growing up, and what effect that had on you?
It was unnerving, depressing, made me angry sometimes. I'd leave the house, go out in the woods and sulk, brooding, wondering why they had to have such a rough relationship. Most of the time they didn't seem to get along too well together. I never knew what the real underlying problems were. I didn't feel it was my place to ask.
Did you blame one or the other? Mom or Dad?
No, I didn't. I was just frustrated that things couldn't be happier around the house.
You just wanted things to be more peaceful.
Right. I never saw any real violent arguments as far as physical hitting or anything like that, but there was a lot of yelling, a lot of tension in the house sometimes.
It was pretty intense, the arguments between the two of you.
Yeah, yes. A lot of the arguments were very intense, and I couldn't see any way but to just leave the room or leave the house, or just, there was no compromise.
How much of this violence in the home was Jeff exposed to?
There were times when he heard the shouting and her physical agitated motions. He observed them, and he went outside and just left the house. And I learned later, I didn't know at the time, I didn't hear him do this, but I learned later that he was slapping the trees with branches and sticks, and I guess apparently out of frustration. So apparently Jeff was very disturbed over the arguments. I have no doubt that he was very disturbed.
There are thousands, literally thousands of children who grow up exposed to these kinds of problems.
And worse.
And worse. And yet they don't go on to do the kinds of things that Jeff did.
In and of themselves, they're not the, I guess we would say, not the only factors. But, you know, everyone's an individual, I guess, aren't they? But there may have been more important, unknown to us yet, trigger points that make Jeff more unique than the usual case.
When you think back on those times, the arguments and the possible effect it may have had on the kids, does it cause you anguish?
It makes me sick that we didn't have a more Ozzie and Harriet type family. And I know there really are no Ozzie and Harriet families per se, but there are some that really are healthy, quite healthy. And ours could have been. And it just makes me sick to my stomach that it wasn't. That's how I feel. And I'll feel that way to my death.
By all outward appearances, Jeffrey Dahmer seemed like a normal boy growing up. So how did he become a serial killer? The search for the root causes went all the way back to his mother's pregnancy. Both of Dahmer's parents said it had not been an easy time, but during separate interviews with each of them, that was about all they agreed on.
At times, her legs would lock tightly in place, and her whole body would grow rigid and begin to tremble. During these strange seizures, her eyes would bulge like a frightened animal, and she would begin to salivate, literally frothing at the mouth. We'd have to call the doctor, who, in those days, they still made house calls, and he came immediately, and it always ended up that he gave her a shot of some type of relaxant.
What kind of drugs was she on?
There were a mixture of things. He would have to come and inject Seconal or morphine, if in some instances when her body would not relax.
The doctor?
Yeah, the doctor.
Morphine, barbiturates?
Yeah, relaxants.
Phenobarbital?
Yes,
She was on a pretty heavy drug regimen.
Yeah, she was on quite a heavy diet of prescription drugs, right.
There were times during the years Jeffrey Dahmer was killing young men and boys when he came close to being caught, stopped from taking more lives. One of those crucial moments still haunted Dahmer's father, Lionel, during my 1994 interview with him.
In March of 1989, you were helping him gather up his belongings, going through his room, and you came across a box. Tell me about that incident.
It was about a 1-foot square box, metal and wood box, that I thought contained pornographic material.
And you asked Jeff to open it?
Yeah, because my mother, you know, I didn't want her to come into contact with any of that stuff. And asked him to open it up, and he refused. He said, "I'd rather not." And I said, "Jeff, open it up. I just want to see what's in there." And he said, "Can't I have any privacy in the house at all? Just this 1 square foot of privacy." And I said, "Jeff, open it up, or I'm going to just take it down into the basement and get a screwdriver or something and open it up. I'll just open it up." And he got angry, very visibly agitated, and said, "If I can't have 1 square foot of privacy, then I'm just going to leave." So he walked out of the house, and then I took the box. I took it from him. I mean, he gave it up. He walked out of the house. I'm surprised that he gave it up. But I started walking down the basement, and then he came in the back door just as I was going down the basement steps, and he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I lost my temper. There's just some pornographic stuff in there." He said, "Just wait. I'll open it up tomorrow morning and show you what it is. Just let me put it away now and forget about it. Let's not cause an uproar anymore today or tonight, and because of Grandma." And so, my not fathoming what could be in that box, I said, "Okay, we'll just open it up tomorrow then, and then let's get rid of it, whatever it is." And the next morning he came down from upstairs and showed me, and there was pornographic literature in there. And I said, "Okay, get rid of it now, and I don't want to, see any more of it around here." He said, "Okay, Dad." And that was the end of that incident, and I didn't realize what was in that box.
What was in the box?
Well, as I learned later, after the trial, it was one of the human heads, one of the victims, which he then took to his work and put in the locker. I told Jeff I can't imagine what I would do if I would have opened that box and found that, because I probably would have reacted in my typical fashion of just shock and numbness. I probably would have thought that, maybe it's an artificial, some type of, I don't know, an occult thing, or just some decorative thing, that something, but not human. I can imagine I would finally realize, or suspicion, what that is. And then I don't know what would happen. I think I probably would have lost it. I don't know what I would have done. I asked Jeff, what would he have done if I would have opened that up and found out what that was. And all he said was, "Well, that would have been the end of the line. The jig would have been up."
One of the chilling stories that your dad tells is about the box he had found. Can you give me your perspective on that?
I had a box in my bedroom closet, and it contained the mummified head and genitals of a young man I met in one of the bars down in Milwaukee. And it was a locked metal box. My dad one week came to visit and happened to see it, and we got into a bit of an argument because I wouldn't open it up. He took the locked box down to the basement and was about to smash it open.
What were you thinking as he was making his way downstairs to open the box?
Well, I was outside, and I was thinking, I've got to stop this from happening. I didn't know what I'd do or say. I didn't know what would happen. I thought, it's all going to come crashing down now. And but the box was never opened, not in my dad's presence. And so the lies continued. The whole scenario just continued for years after that.
Were there times when your dad may have been closer to discovering what was going on than even he knew? Times where you got worried that maybe he would find something out?
The box incident was about as close as it came, yeah. That was just one incident. There were others, but that was a particularly nerve-wracking one.
Are there others you can share? Other close calls?
When acidified, dissolved human remains were found, they didn't look like human remains anymore, but they were in the trash bin outside in the garage. That was one incident. And a few others I'd rather not go into right now.
Were you relieved to be arrested?
Part of me was, and part of me wasn't.
Explain.
I don't know. It's like I don't believe I have a split personality, but you know the feeling where you're sort of glad about something, but on the other hand you're not. That's how it was. It was a relief not to have to keep such a gigantic secret that I had kept for so many years. And once I saw that I had no choice but to face it, I decided to face it head on and make a full confession. So I am glad that the secrets are gone.
Coming up, a father's anguish as he confronts the gruesome reality of his son's crimes.
What was it like the first time you saw Jeff after he was arrested for murder? How good was Jeff at manipulating you?
Excellent. He's very good.
Good liar?
He fooled everyone. He fooled me. Yeah, very good. He fooled his probation officer, his attorney, the police, you know, who came. I mean, he had bodies in his next room when the police were standing in his outer room. There were so many people that he fooled.
And he could lie and be cool as a cucumber.
Yeah, he just looked very innocuous. He just looked like an average person who couldn't possibly do the things that he did.
What was it like the first time you saw Jeff after he was arrested for murder?
Oh, that was really tough. He was disheveled, you know, beard, and he hadn't slept. There were people screaming in the cells, and he just stood there like a limp rag.
What did you say to each other?
I went up to him and I said, "Jeff, I love you." I hugged him. I cried. He didn't seem to be emotionally moved. He just seemed like he was just wrung out.
Did he hug you back?
Yeah, as well as he could. He was shackled in front of him, so he really couldn't hug. But he pressed, you know, forward. But it just seemed like he was just his soul had dropped out of him.
What were his first words to you when he saw you?
I'm just so sorry. I really screwed up. It was pretty much unemotional, emotionless response. He just said those words, and he looked extremely depressed and sad.
Do you remember the feelings that went through you at that point?
Yeah, I felt really those same feelings: depression, you know, extremely well, shame and just what a waste. The other feelings were that I wanted to still help him in some way, and I kept telling him, reassuring that his attorney said that he would get help. And I told Jeff that you really do need help, Jeff, mental help. And we're going to try to get you into this place to get the proper help.
How did you feel when you first heard about the crimes, about the nature of the crimes he'd committed?
I think it was sort of a feeling as if I were just floating above myself and observing some other person. As if I were anesthetized with something that just prevented me from feeling anything deeply. It was just a total stun, a total shock.
You went numb?
Complete numbness.
And in the moment when the pain has come through, what is it that you felt?
I felt all these different emotions come over me. How am I going to face victims, families, if I go to the trial? How can I arrange something? My feelings were for Jeff too. I sort of put myself in his place. He's totally lost. I could almost feel the total disorientation and loss, a feeling like maybe he would want to commit suicide. I felt very depressed and shamed. Just very, very depressed, just to the bottom of the pit.
Have you ever stopped loving your son?
No. No. I think that part of my continuing to want to love and support him is because I can remember him as a youth when he was innocent.
What do you see when you look at Jeff's face?
I guess the parent, naive parent in me still says I see an innocent, shy child, a defenseless, vulnerable child who I wish I could help now. I know there are some people who say don't, he shouldn't have any peace. The victims' families don't have any peace. But I want to see what I can do to help Jeff have some peace in his mind, because there's still things there.
Does he deserve that?
And well, yeah, I think he does.
Was there a time when you hated Jeff for what he did?
Yeah, I think probably there was a mixture of feelings of anger and hate and disappointment and also feeling extremely sorry for what he did. Felt very sorry for victims and their families, and also for Jeff. The terrible waste.
Have you had a chance to sit down with Jeff and ask him why? Why did you do this? What was it?
I asked him once, and he doesn't know. I asked him, he does not know. And it seems like a stunted, short answer. That, it seems like there should be more of an answer than that, but he says he really doesn't know.
Coming up.
I tell you, Dad, I'm really sorry that this has happened, and I love you a lot. I love you too. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
The conclusion to Confessions of a Serial Killer when we come back.
Your father told me that one of the reasons he wrote this book was in order to put down on paper what he has been unable to say to you in words, kind of reaching out to you. What do you want to say to him, having read this?
I tell you, Dad, I'm really sorry that this has happened, and I love you a lot.
I love you too.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
We haven't always shown it a lot, but I do love him a great deal.
I love you.
And without the support of my folks, I don't think I would have come through this. We've opened up with each other a lot more now since the trial and everything. There's no secrets to be hidden away. You know, I don't feel that I have to keep any secrets from him. We've come to face what's real now instead of just glossing things over and talking about superficial things. So there's a lot more communication between us.
This book may serve as a further bridge between Jeff and myself. And just for that purpose, I regard it as valuable for me.
Do you feel closer to your dad having read this?
I feel closer in that I understand more how he was thinking, what his thoughts were, what some of his motivations were. I'm glad he wrote it.
Anything not in the book you want to say to him?
I can't think too clearly right now. I'm feeling pretty emotional. I think that a lot of things have been brought out in this interview that has brought us to a little bit deeper, just a little bit closer understanding as to how this all originated. And, well, whenever I get emotional, my analytical side gets clouded, and I can't express myself quite as well as I would like.
Can you talk about the feelings you have? You feeling close to Jeff?
I feel very close to Jeff, and it's going to continue until our death. And I feel good about it.
Do you think you'll ever have the answers you've been looking for about why, what happened, and what role, if any, you played?
Maybe not. My primary question is the origins of it. And if something can be learned about that, it may help other people avert problems.
Is it still there, Jeff? Does it ever go away?
In part, no, it never completely goes away. I'll probably have to live with it for the rest of my life. I wish it would go away. I wish there was some way to completely get rid of the compulsive thoughts, the feelings. It's not nearly so bad now that there's no avenues to actually act on it. But no, it never seems to go completely away.
So the thoughts still come to you?
Sometimes, yeah.
Are you different, Jeff, in terms of how you think back on all of this?
I would hope I'm different. I'm glad that I'm in a position now where I don't feel the compulsion to do these things. I'm glad that it's over. Any words I say to the victims' families are just going to seem trite and empty. I don't know how to express the regret, the sorrow, that I feel for what I've done for their sons. I can't find the right words. All right, see you later, Dad.
After the interview at the prison, Dahmer casually showed us something a little unsettling.
Just a point of interest, that's the type of box.
This is the type of box?
Exactly.
He wanted us to know that box looked strikingly like the one his father had found, the one Jeffrey had used to hide body parts.
Thank you, Jeff. All right.
To this day, the interview with Jeffrey Dahmer remains one of the eeriest experiences of my 30 years in television news. From the weak handshake with which he greeted me to his bizarre observation about that metal box as he returned to his cell, Dahmer was a haunting figure. He often said he had wanted the death penalty. 9 months after our interview, his death wish came true. I'm Stone Phillips.